The letter promised $1,000 for a single bullet. In my line of work, that's a good week, a great month even. And the target was simple, a 22-year-old girl named Elena Rodriguez. The contract, signed by a territorial judge named Hamilton Blackwood, was brutally clear. Fled a lawful marriage, stole family heirlooms, considered armed and extremely dangerous. Payment upon proof of death. For 12 years, I'd been the man they called when things got messy. Daniel Cross. The name meant something out here on the frontier. It meant if you were running, I was the last person you ever wanted to see. I never missed. I never came back empty-handed. It was a simple principle that had kept me alive and paid my bills. This was just another job, or so I told myself as the Montana wilderness tried to freeze the marrow in my bones. A blizzard was coming, the sky the color of a fresh bruise, and I'd been on her trail for 3 days. She was smart, I'll give her that. She stuck to the roughest country, the kind of God-forsaken rock and pine that chews up horses and spits out men. But she made mistakes. A boot print in a patch of mud the wind hadn't scoured yet, a broken twig hanging at just the wrong angle, tiny little whispers that told me everything I needed to know. She was tired, she was running scared, and she was close. I found where she'd tried to cross a frozen creek. The ice had shattered under her weight. I could see where she'd clawed her way out on the other side, a dark, ragged hole in the white expanse. Her clothes would be soaked. In this cold, a wet coat was a death sentence. The wilderness would kill her long before my bullet had the chance. But the contract said proof of death. $1,000 didn't get paid for maybes. I studied the snow on the far bank. That's when I saw the first thing that didn't fit. A few drops of blood, dark red against the stark white. Not a lot, but enough. She was hurt. The fall had been worse than I thought. Her tracks, now unsteady, told a story of pain and desperation. She was limping, slowing down. A part of me, a part I thought I'd buried back in Kansas with my deputy's badge, felt a flicker of something like pity. A 22-year-old girl, alone, hurt, freezing to death in a blizzard. But pity was a luxury, a weakness. In my world, you were either the wolf or the sheep, and I had chosen to be the wolf a long, long time ago. The snow was coming down thick now, a blinding curtain of white. It was getting harder to see the trail, but I could feel it. I was closing in. She couldn't have gone much farther. She'd be looking for shelter, any hole to crawl into to escape the wind's teeth, and that's when I saw it. Tucked behind a fallen pine, almost completely hidden by drifting snow, was the dark maw of an abandoned mine shaft. Her tracks led right to it. She had gone to ground, like a wounded fox running to its den. This was it, the end of the hunt. I unslung my rifle, the cold metal of familiar comfort in my hands. I checked the action, my movements sure and practiced. A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. I didn't know if she was armed, but the contract said to assume she was. I approached the entrance slowly, my boots making no sound in the deep powder. The wind howled, covering any noise I might make. I peered into the blackness of the mine. It was silent, too silent. My instincts were screaming. This felt wrong. This felt like a trap. I expected the click of a hammer, the glint of a gun barrel in the darkness. Instead, I heard a sound that drifted out of that frozen hole in the earth and stopped my heart cold. It wasn't the sound of a fugitive preparing for a fight. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a plea. It was the sound of a woman crying, and not just any cry. It was a raw, primal scream of pure agony. The kind of sound that strips away everything human and leaves only pain. The kind of sound I'd only heard once before, in a stuffy farmhouse bedroom, years ago, when I helped my sister bring her first child into this world. My mind refused to process it. It couldn't be. The letter had said nothing. The description was clinical. A thief, a fugitive, armed and dangerous. But the woman in that mine wasn't a dangerous criminal plotting her final stand. She was giving birth, alone, in the frozen dark, with a blizzard raging outside and a man sent to kill her standing at the entrance. I slowly lowered my rifle, my knuckles white. $1,000, proof of death. The words echoed in my head, but they had lost their meaning. For the first time in 12 years, my cold professional certainty shattered into a million pieces. The wind howled like the ghosts of all the men I'd put in the ground, and from the darkness, Elena Rodriguez cried out again. But this time her voice wasn't alone, faint but unmistakable, thin and reedy, but alive. It was the cry of a newborn baby, taking its first breath in a world that had already paid for its death. What in God's name had I walked into? I spent the night huddled in a shallow cave about 50 yards from the mine, the blizzard screaming its fury. I didn't build a fire, I didn't dare. I just sat there in the freezing dark, listening. The sounds from the mine were a symphony of misery and miracles. Elena's cries would fade to exhausted whimpers, then rise again, punctuated by the thin, insistent wail of the baby. A new life had come into the world in the belly of that dead mountain. Against all odds, when the first pale light of dawn broke through the gray clouds, the wind had died down. The world was buried in 3 feet of fresh snow, silent and clean. It was like the storm had washed the whole world new. Maybe it had washed me new too, because the man who had walked up this mountain yesterday was not the same man who stood now, staring at that dark opening in the rock. The Daniel Cross of yesterday would have waited for her to weaken, then finish the job. Cold, simple, professional. But the man standing here now, he couldn't reconcile the image of an armed and dangerous fugitive with the sounds of a mother soothing her newborn child. I pulled Judge Blackwood's letter from my coat. The paper was stiff with cold. I read it again in the flat morning light. Fled from lawful marriage ceremony to Senator William Garrett. I knew of Garrett, a man in his 60s, rich as sin, with a kind of political power that made judges like Blackwood bow and scrape. He'd buried 2 wives already. People whispered about that. They whispered about his temper, his appetites. He was known for collecting young, beautiful things. Elena was 22. Stolen family heirlooms valued at over $2,000. What kind of theft warranted a death sentence without a trial? What kind of marriage required an assassin to enforce it? The questions piled up, each one chipping away at the simple, brutal logic I'd lived by for 12 years. Dead is dead, and money is money. But this wasn't simple. This was a mother and a child. And the contract, it stank. It stank of a cover-up, of powerful men erasing an inconvenience. From deep within the mine, I heard a new sound. Not crying, singing. A woman's voice, soft and exhausted, but beautiful. She was singing a lullaby in Spanish, a song my own mother used to sing to me when I was a boy in Texas, scared of the dark. Duérmete, niño, duérmete ya, que viene el lobo y te comerá. Sleep, child, sleep now, for the wolf is coming and will devour you. The irony hit me like a physical blow. I was the wolf, the man sent by the powerful to devour the innocent. But as I stood there, listening to that ancient song of a mother's love, something inside me, something I'd thought was frozen solid for years, began to crack. It wasn't a lightning bolt. It was more like the slow, grinding thaw of a frozen river in springtime. Inevitable, unstoppable. I had to see her. I had to hear her story from her own lips. I lit my lantern, the small flame pushing back the gray morning. I walked to the mouth of the mine. I didn't try to be quiet. I wanted her to hear me coming. Startling a new mother, even an unarmed one, was a good way to get yourself hurt. The main shaft was a rough-hewn tunnel, smelling of damp earth and forgotten dreams. Old rail tracks, rusted and broken, led deeper into the mountain. The sound of her singing was my only guide. It led me past abandoned tools and piles of worthless rock, deeper and deeper into the earth. The air grew warmer here, away from the wind. I understood now why she'd chosen this place. Down here she might just survive. I found her in a large chamber where the miners had clearly hit a rich vein. A small, smoky fire struggled against the far wall, built from broken timbers. The smoke coiled up towards a crack in the ceiling, a natural chimney. It was almost warm in here. She was propped up against a pile of old burlap sacks. A heavy wool cloak, the kind rich people wore, was wrapped around her, and the baby nestled against her chest. Even in the dim lantern light, covered in dirt and exhausted, she was beautiful. Dark hair, skin the color of warm honey. But it wasn't her beauty that stopped me in my tracks. It was her eyes. When she looked up and saw me standing there, a stranger with a rifle in his hands, she didn't flinch. There was no fear, no panic, just a deep, weary calm, a strange kind of dignity that had no place in a cold, dark hole in the ground. She finished the verse of her lullaby, her voice never wavering. Then she looked right at me. "You must be the man they sent to kill me," she said. Her English was accented but clear. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. What do you say to that? I just stood there, my rifle suddenly feeling heavy and obscene. I took off my hat, a gesture of respect that felt foreign and right all at the same time. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "I am." She shifted the baby slightly, and for the first time, I saw its face. Tiny, red, and perfect. "Will you do it now?" she asked, her voice still holding that same unnerving calm. "I should tell you, I have no weapon. I threw my pistol away before I crossed the creek. I couldn't risk falling with a loaded gun so close to my child." The casual way she spoke about her own execution, as if discussing the weather, was more disarming than any plea for mercy. This wasn't a woman who begged. She was a mother. She had already accepted death to protect her child. "That depends," I said, my own voice sounding rough. "It depends on what really happened back in Silver Ridge. The letter I have tells one story, but I'm starting to think there's another one." She laughed then, a short, bitter sound with no humor in it. "A lawful marriage," she said, her eyes flashing. "I suppose it was lawful, in the same way it's lawful to sell a horse, as long as the bill of sale is signed." She looked down at her baby, and her whole face softened. "My father owed Senator Garrett a great deal of money, gambling debts. He couldn't pay with cash, so he paid with me." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "And the stolen heirlooms?" She reached into her cloak and pulled out a small velvet pouch. She tossed it on the ground between us. It landed with a soft clink. "My mother's jewelry. It's been in my family for generations. Garrett called it part of my dowry, but it was never his to take. When I ran, I took back the only thing that was truly mine." I picked up the pouch. Inside, a necklace and earrings shimmered in the lantern light. They were old, finely crafted, and clearly valuable. But they felt different from the gaudy jewels of society women. They felt like history, like love. I looked from the jewelry back to her and the baby. The judge's letter said she was armed and dangerous. The only thing dangerous about this woman was the truth she carried, a truth powerful men would kill to keep silent. "Tell me, Mr. Cross, Daniel Cross. Tell me, Mr. Cross, do you have a mother, a sister, any woman in your life you care for?" I thought of my sister Mary, gone 8 years now, taken by a fever while I was off chasing some rustler for $100 bounty. "I had a sister," I said. "Then you understand," she said, her voice low but fierce. "Would you have let her be sold? Forced to marry a man who had already buried 2 wives under very convenient circumstances? A man old enough to be her grandfather?" The question hung there in the dark. I pictured Mary at 21, full of life and laughter. The thought of her being traded like cattle made my hands clench into fists. "The baby," I said, changing the subject. "Is it Garrett's?" Her face turned to stone. "No, thank God." Her expression softened again as she looked at the child. "There was a young man, a school teacher in Silver Ridge. His name is Miguel Santos. We were in love. When my father made the deal with Garrett, Miguel wanted to run away with me. But I knew Garrett would have him killed. So I told him no. I told him to stay safe." "But you were already pregnant." "Yes," she whispered. "I think my father knew. That's why he rushed the wedding. Garrett was promised a virgin bride. He would have discovered the truth on our wedding night, and then he would have murdered us both. So I ran. I ran to save my baby and to save the man I love." The pieces all clicked into place. This wasn't a contract. It was a death warrant for a witness. Elena Rodriguez wasn't a criminal. She was a survivor. And the men who wanted her dead weren't men of law. They were monsters. The baby started to fuss. Elena opened her cloak and began to nurse the child, completely unashamed. In the flickering firelight, the scene was almost holy. A mother and child, safe for a moment in the heart of the earth, while a world of wolves waited outside. "So what will you do now, Mr. Cross?" she asked, not looking up. "Will you collect your $1,000 or will you let us go?" This was the moment, the crossroads of my life. I could do the easy thing, the profitable thing. One bullet and I could walk away, richer and colder than before. I could go back to being the wolf, or I could do the hard thing, the dangerous thing, the thing that would make me a target for the most powerful men in the territory. I reached into my coat. Elena flinched, pulling the baby tighter, her eyes shutting as she braced for the end. She thought I was reaching for my gun. Instead, I pulled out the velvet pouch with her mother's jewelry. I walked over and placed it gently beside her. Then I drew my pistol. She gasped. I opened the cylinder. One by one, I let the bullets fall from my hand, clattering onto the stone floor of the mine. They rolled into the darkness, useless and spent. I holstered the empty gun. "My name is Daniel Cross," I said, my voice clearer than it had been in years. "And I'm not hunting you anymore, Elena Rodriguez. If you'll let me, I'm going to get you and your child out of here. I'm going to get you somewhere safe." She opened her eyes. They were filled with tears, but she was smiling. A smile so radiant it lit up the darkness better than any lantern. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Mr. Cross. I will have your help." The hunt was over, but I had a sinking feeling the war was just beginning. The blizzard had been a gift. It had covered our tracks, buying us time we desperately needed. I fashioned a crude sledge from old mining timbers and rope, something to carry Elena and the baby down the mountain. She was weak, weaker than she let on, but her spirit was pure steel. She never complained. She just held her child and watched the trail ahead, her eyes sharp and alert. "She needs a name," Elena said as we paused for a rest in a grove of snow-heavy pines. "I can't just keep calling her my baby." "What were you thinking?" I asked, scanning our back trail. The wilderness was still, but my senses were on fire. We were the hunted now, both of us. "Esperanza," she said softly, looking down at the bundle in her arms. "It means hope in my language. She was born in the darkest place, but she is my hope for the light." "Esperanza," I repeated. It was a good name, a fighting name. "Esperanza Rodriguez." "No," she corrected me, her voice firm. "Esperanza Santos. She will have her real father's name, Miguel Santos." Her expression clouded over. "He doesn't even know she exists, Daniel. For all he knows, I married that monster. He probably thinks I abandoned him." "We'll find him," I said, with more confidence than I felt. "We'll tell him." "If he's still alive," she whispered, and the fear in her voice was real. "Men like Garrett, they don't leave loose ends. When he realized I was pregnant, he would have started asking questions. It wouldn't take him long to learn about Miguel. He's a good man, a gentle man. He's a teacher. He wouldn't stand a chance." The weight of it all settled on me. It wasn't just about getting Elena and Esperanza to safety anymore. There was an innocent man caught in the crossfire, a man who was likely already dead or would be soon. "There's something else," I said, the memory of the contract burning in my mind. The letter from Judge Blackwood. It was specific. It didn't say bring you back for trial. It said payment upon proof of death. That means they never wanted you found. They wanted you erased. Elena looked at me, her dark eyes wide. "But why? I'm just a girl who ran away. What threat am I to them?" And that was the $1,000 question, wasn't it? The answer, I suspected, was far bigger and uglier than a broken marriage contract. Elena's face suddenly went pale, a flicker of memory in her eyes. "The wedding dinner," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The night before I ran. Garrett was drinking. He was boasting to Judge Blackwood and some other men. He was laughing about how, once I was his wife, my family's name in the Mexican community would silence any questions about what happened to the last territorial inspector." My blood ran cold. "What inspector?" "His name was Thomas Hernandez. He came to Silver Ridge 6 months ago. The official story is that he was investigating mining claims, but he was asking other questions about voting, about Mexican families being forced off their land. What happened to him? He disappeared, Elena said. They said he finished his investigation and left town, but his horse was found wandering a week later. Miguel told me. Miguel said that Inspector Hernandez never left Silver Ridge. The pieces were slamming together now, forming a picture of pure evil. Garrett wasn't just a bully, he was a killer, and the inspector had found proof. My God, I breathed. The evidence. Elena's eyes met mine, and in them I saw the terrible truth. There's more, she said, her voice trembling. Inspector Thomas Hernandez. He was my mother's cousin. He stayed with my family while he was in town. He told my father he had found proof of Garrett's crimes. Murder, bribery. He said he'd hidden copies somewhere safe, somewhere Garrett would never think to look. This was it. This was why they wanted her dead. It wasn't about the marriage or the jewelry. It was about what she might know, or what her father might have told her. Her father, the man who sold her to his daughter's potential murderer. Do you know where it is? I asked, my voice urgent. The evidence? She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. My father would never tell me. He was too afraid of Garrett. But there was one other person Inspector Hernandez trusted completely. One person he spent hours talking with, sharing his hopes for justice. I knew the name before she said it. Miguel Santos, she whispered. If anyone knows where that evidence is hidden, it's him. And just like that, Miguel Santos went from being a loose end to being the most important man in the entire territory. If he was alive, he was holding a bomb that could blow Garrett's entire criminal empire sky high, and Garrett knew it. We have to get back to Silver Ridge, I said, my mind racing. We have to get to him before Garrett's men do. It's too late, Elena sobbed, her composure finally breaking. He's already dead. I know it, and it's my fault. I knelt in the snow in front of her. I took her hand. It was cold, but her grip was strong. No, we don't know that. Hope, remember? Esperanza. We have to try. For her, for Miguel, for everyone Garrett has hurt. We have to fight back. She looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms, then back at me. The tears stopped. The steel returned to her eyes. What do we do? I looked down the mountain toward the distant valley where Silver Ridge lay waiting. It was a snake pit. We'd be walking right into it, but we had no choice. First, I said, we find some friends. The journey to the Ramirez homestead was a tense, silent march. I taught Elena how to use my spare pistol, and she handled it with a familiarity that surprised me. My father taught me, she said. He said a woman alone on the frontier needs to be able to protect herself. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. Maria Ramirez was a woman carved from the same tough earth as the mountains. She took one look at Elena, the baby, and the guns I was carrying, and ushered us inside without a single question. Her husband Carlos was a quiet, solid man whose eyes missed nothing. They were good people, the kind of people who made you believe in civilization again. But the news they had was bad. Miguel Santos is gone, Carlos said, his face grim. Vanished 4 days ago. The new sheriff, a man named Davidson, came by yesterday, said Miguel was wanted for questioning, called him a dangerous man. It was worse than I thought. Garrett wasn't just hunting Miguel. He was destroying his name, turning the whole town against him, poisoning the well so that no one would help him. But Carlos had a flicker of hope for us. There's a place, an old line shack up in the timber. Miguel once told me it was a safe place to hide if there was ever trouble. It was a long shot, but it was the only one we had. Elena wanted to come with me. He won't trust you, she insisted. He'll think you're one of them. You're not strong enough, I told her, my voice harder than I intended. You need to rest. You need to keep Esperanza safe. I'll go. I'll be careful. Before I left, Elena pulled me aside. Daniel, she said, her voice low, if you don't come back, thank you. You gave us a chance. I'm coming back, I promised, both of us. As I rode into the blackness of the forest, I knew I was walking into an ambush, either from Garrett's men or from a terrified school teacher who would shoot first and ask questions later. But I had made a promise, and for the first time in a long time, it was a promise I intended to keep, no matter the cost. The protector had become a guardian, and the guardian was about to walk into the wolf's den. The lion shack was a shadow within shadows, tucked so deep in the pines it felt like the world had forgotten it. The place screamed of abandonment, but my gut told me otherwise. There were signs, small but clear, a footprint here, a freshly cut piece of firewood there, and a thin strand of wire, a tripwire, stretched across the path just high enough to catch a horse's leg in the dark. Miguel Santos was here, and he was terrified. I didn't approach. I found a spot in the trees, a place with a clear view of the cabin, and I settled in to wait. Patience was a hunter's best weapon. I could outwait any man alive. The cold seeped into my bones, but I ignored it. I became part of the forest, another silent, watching thing. Hours passed. The moon climbed high, casting silver light through the branches. Finally, the cabin door creaked open. A rifle barrel poked out first, followed by a voice, shaky but firm. "I know you're out there. State your business or ride on." I stayed put. I didn't want him to see me yet. "My name is Daniel Cross," I called out, my voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "I'm a friend of Elena Rodriguez." The silence that followed was heavy with suspicion. "That's impossible," the voice shot back. "Elena is dead." Sheriff Davidson announced it himself. Said a bounty hunter tracked her down. Garrett's poison had spread fast. "The sheriff is a liar," I said. "Elena is alive, and she has a daughter. Born 3 days ago in an old mine shaft up on the mountain. She named her Esperanza Santos." I could hear a sharp intake of breath from the cabin. I had him, but he was still cautious, still scared. "If you're telling the truth," he called out, "prove it. Tell me something only a friend would know. Tell me about the poem." My mind went blank. A poem? Elena had never mentioned a poem. I was about to fail. He was going to stay holed up in there, and we were going to lose our chance. Then a memory surfaced. The song, the lullaby in the mine. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. "She didn't talk about a poem," I called back. "She sang a song, a lullaby she sings to her daughter. Duérmete, niño, que viene el lobo y te comerá." The cabin door swung open. A young man stood silhouetted against the dark interior. He was thin, scholarly, not a fighter, but his eyes, even in the dim moonlight, burned with a fierce intelligence. He held the rifle, but it was pointed at the ground. Miguel Santos was alive. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "She's safe," I said, stepping out of the trees, my hands held open and away from my guns. "But not for long. We need your help, Miguel. We need the evidence Inspector Hernandez gave you." He flinched at the inspector's name. "How did you know about that?" "Elena told me everything." He led me inside the tiny one-room shack. It was sparse, but there was a fire in the hearth and a small stack of books in the corner. He was a man who valued knowledge above all else. "Thomas was my friend," Miguel said, his voice heavy with grief. "He knew he was in danger. He gave me a strong box full of documents, sworn affidavits, photographs, Garrett's own ledgers, proof of everything. He made me promise to keep it safe." "Where is it?" He looked at me, the fear and suspicion still warring in his eyes. "It's hidden in the schoolhouse, beneath the floorboards of my classroom." Hope surged through me. It still existed, but getting it would be suicide. "We can't just walk in there. The sheriff, Davidson, he's watching the town." "It's worse than that," Miguel said, his face pale. "It's not just Davidson. The U.S. Marshal for this territory, a man named Hendricks. He's on Garrett's payroll too. Thomas had proof. That's why Garrett had him killed. There's no one we can turn to, no law to help us." The trap was bigger and more complete than I had ever imagined. Garrett didn't just own the town, he owned the law itself. Any official appeal for help would be a death sentence. They had us cornered from every direction. We rode back to the Ramirez homestead under the cover of the pre-dawn darkness. The reunion between Elena and Miguel was a thing of raw, desperate beauty. They clung to each other, tears streaming down their faces, a family forged in tragedy and reunited against impossible odds. But our time was running out. We gathered around the Ramirez's kitchen table, the baby Esperanza sleeping peacefully in a makeshift cradle, blissfully unaware of the storm raging around her. We were a tiny army against a corrupt empire, a bounty hunter, a school teacher, a runaway mother, and 2 brave farmers. "We can't sneak in," I said, the plan forming in my mind, as crazy as it was. "They'll be expecting that. They'll have men watching every shadow." "So we run?" Carlos asked. "No," I said. "We don't run. We don't hide. We do the one thing they'll never expect." They all looked at me. Elena, Miguel, Maria, Carlos. Their faces were a mixture of fear and hope. "We walk into town in broad daylight," I said, my voice low and steady. "We walk right up to that school, in front of the whole town. We get that evidence box and we show the people the truth. We make it public. We force a confrontation Garrett can't cover up." Miguel's eyes widened. "You want to start a revolution?" "I want to end a war," I corrected him. "Garrett's power comes from secrets and fear. We take that away from him. We give the people the truth and let them decide." Elena looked from Miguel to me, then down at her sleeping daughter. When she looked up, her eyes were shining with a fire I had never seen before. "My daughter was born in darkness," she said. "She deserves to grow up in the light. Let's go show them the sun." It was a suicide mission, a desperate, insane gamble. But as I looked at the faces around that table, I knew it was our only chance. We were out of shadows to hide in. It was time to step into the light, or be extinguished forever. We would ride into Silver Ridge, not as fugitives, but as avengers. And by sunset, either we would be free, or we would all be dead. The main street of Silver Ridge was quiet when we arrived. Too quiet. It was the middle of the afternoon, the time when school let out, when the street should have been bustling with kids and parents. But the town felt like it was holding its breath. They knew something was coming. We rode 5 abreast. Me, Elena with Esperanza strapped to her chest, Miguel and Carlos Ramirez with his brother, their faces set like stone. We weren't sneaking. We were making a statement. Heads turned, windows open. People stepped out of shops, their faces a mixture of shock and fear. They saw Elena Rodriguez, the woman reported dead, riding tall and proud. They saw Miguel Santos, the man branded a criminal, looking more like a prophet than a fugitive. By the time we reached the schoolhouse at the end of the street, a crowd had started to gather. They kept their distance, but they were watching. Every single one of them. Then we saw why the town was so quiet. Sheriff Davidson and 4 deputies were waiting for us, rifles held at the ready. They were standing between us in the schoolhouse door. "Elena Rodriguez," Davidson's voice boomed across the street, full of false authority. "You're under arrest." "On whose authority, Sheriff?" I called back, swinging down from my horse. I kept my hand away from my gun, but my whole body was coiled like a spring. "On the authority of the law, you're wanted for theft and fleeing a lawful marriage to Senator Garrett." That was Miguel's cue. He dismounted and stepped forward, his voice clear and strong, the voice of a teacher used to commanding attention. "Elena Rodriguez was never married to Senator Garrett. She was sold to him by her father, and she fled to save her life and the life of her child." He pointed at the sleeping baby on Elena's chest. A gasp went through the crowd. This was the first they had seen of the child, the first proof of the lies they had been fed. "And I am not a criminal," Miguel continued, his voice rising with passion. "I am a teacher who was entrusted with the truth, a truth that Sheriff Davidson and Senator Garrett would kill to keep buried." "That's enough," Davidson shouted, his composure starting to crack. The crowd was growing, pressing closer. They were listening to Miguel. "All of you are under arrest for interfering with an officer of the law." "What law are you serving, Sheriff?" a man called from the crowd. It was the town doctor, a respected figure. "The law that murders territorial inspectors? The law that brands innocent men as fugitives?" Davidson's face went pale. The story was out. The whispers had become a roar. "I have the evidence," Miguel declared, walking steadily toward the schoolhouse door. "Inspector Hernandez's final report. He gave it to me for safekeeping before Garrett's men murdered him." "Stop right there, Santos," Davidson screamed, raising his rifle and pointing it directly at Miguel's back. "I'm warning you." The crowd gasped. This was it, the moment of truth. Was the sheriff of Silver Ridge going to gun down an unarmed schoolteacher in the back, in front of 50 witnesses? I drew my pistol. Not fast, slow and deliberate. I didn't aim it at Davidson. I just held it, a silent promise of what would happen if he pulled that trigger. "You shoot him, Sheriff," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "And every man, woman, and child here will know you're nothing but Garrett's executioner. You'll hang." Davidson hesitated. His eyes darted from me, to Miguel, to the angry faces in the crowd. His deputies were looking nervous, their rifles wavering. This wasn't what they signed up for. In that moment of hesitation, Miguel reached the schoolhouse door, pulled a key from his pocket, and unlocked it. He disappeared inside. "What's in that school, Sheriff?" the doctor demanded. "What are you so afraid of us seeing?" We could hear the sound of floorboards being pried up from inside the classroom. Davidson was sweating now, trapped between his master's orders and a town that was turning on him. Then Miguel reappeared. He was carrying a heavy metal strongbox covered in dirt. He held it up for everyone to see. "This is what he's afraid of," Miguel shouted. He set the box down on the school steps and used a crowbar to pry open the rusted lock. It sprang open with a loud crack. He reached inside and pulled out the first document. He held it high. "This is a sworn affidavit from Maria Vasquez," he announced, his voice ringing with righteous fury, testifying that she saw two of Sheriff Davidson's deputies beat her husband to death after he refused to sell his land to Senator Garrett's mining company. An angry roar went through the crowd. Men started pushing forward, their faces dark with rage. Davidson's deputies took a nervous step back. They were losing control. Miguel pulled out another paper. "This is a ledger in Garrett's own handwriting, detailing bribes paid to U.S. Marshal Hendricks to look the other way." Another roar. The crowd was becoming a mob. "And this," Miguel said, his voice dropping, but carrying with terrible weight, "this is Inspector Hernandez's final, signed report to the territorial governor, recommending the immediate arrest of Senator William Garrett for conspiracy, bribery, and the murder of at least 5 citizens of this territory." It was over. The truth was out, a flood that could not be stopped. Sheriff Davidson looked at the angry faces surrounding him, and he knew he was a dead man. He dropped his rifle in the dust. His deputies did the same. The law in Silver Ridge had been broken, and the people were taking it back. Elena slid off her horse, walking through the crowd that parted for her like the sea. She stood on the school steps beside Miguel, holding her daughter. She looked at the people of Silver Ridge, her people. "My name is Elena Rodriguez Santos," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "And this is my daughter, Esperanza. We are not fugitives, we are survivors, and we are not afraid anymore." The crowd erupted in a cheer that shook the rafters of the sky. It was a sound of liberation, a sound of justice, a sound of hope, born in darkness, now standing in the bright, cleansing light of day. We had won. We had walked into the wolf's den and torn it down from the inside. A week later, the federal marshals, the real ones, rode into town. Senator Garrett was arrested at a political rally, still cluelessly shaking hands while the empire he built on blood and fear crumbled around him. Judge Blackwood, Sheriff Davidson, Marshal Hendricks, they all fell like dominoes. The governor offered me a badge, a real one, U.S. Marshal for the whole territory. The old Daniel Cross would have laughed. The hunter doesn't become the shepherd. But I wasn't the old Daniel Cross. I looked at Elena, her face bright with a future she never thought she'd have. I looked at Miguel, already planning a bigger school, a library, a place of learning for the children who were now free. And I looked at little Esperanza, hope personified, gurgling in her mother's arms. I had spent my life taking things, taking lives, taking money, taking my own soul piece by piece. It was time to give something back. "I accept," I told the governor. My first official act was to deputize Miguel Santos and Carlos Ramirez. My second was to help nail the last shingles onto the new schoolhouse roof. The hunt was over. My contract was complete. But my real work, the work of a protector, a guardian, a father, that was just beginning. I had found my proof of life, and it was worth more than $1,000 could ever buy. If you enjoyed this story of justice on the frontier, I think you're going to love the 2 stories waiting for you on the screen right now. They're packed with the kind of twists and turns that will keep you guessing until the very end. So go ahead, click on one of them, and let's keep this journey going. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You don't want to miss what's coming next.